How can we all be climate changemakers? Welcome to Future Hindsight, where we take big ideas in civic life and democracy and turn them into action items for you and me. Because democracy is not a spectator sport, tomorrow starts right now. I'm Mila Atmos. Democracy runs on informed, engaged citizens, but when it comes to the climate crisis, most of us feel overwhelmed rather than empowered. Only 8% of us have actually taken action, whether through activism, consumer choices, or even just talking about it with friends and family. Today's guest has written a guide that considers how each of us is a node of possibility for change that takes us from overwhelm to participation while offering our very own superpowers along the way. Dr. Katharine Wilkinson is the host of the podcast A Matter of Degrees and the author of several books. Her latest is Climate Wayfinding, Healing Ourselves and the Planet We Call Home. It's a resource, a toolbox for every climate change maker. Hey, and before we start, if you want to support Future Hindsight and all the work we do as an independent podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's easy and free, and it really goes a long way. Check us out at youtube.com/Future Hindsight. Welcome, Katharine. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, Mila, it's such a delight to get to have this conversation with you.
So, when we talk about the climate crisis, as I mentioned, so often the solutions seem out of reach, and so many of the solutions, in fact, also seem to disregard human-focused efforts. And you note that science has identified the climate crisis as anthropogenic, which is to say that it is made by humans. And you argue, I'm going to quote you now, if the problem of climate change originates in human activity, then planetary healing must as well. And I have to admit here, I never thought about it quite in this way. I'm sure a lot of people haven't. I think about it like, we need to make corporations stop burning fossil fuels. We need to, shift public policy. So in your mind, what kind of solutions are possible when we change our mindset to this frame that we need to originate the healing with humans?
I love this question. And I think there is something about a challenge that is as big, as global, as existential, and as long-term as the climate crisis that does make us disconnect, right? We think, I'm too small, I'm too late, and there's really not much that I can do that is meaningful. But of course, as you're saying, Mila, the very origin of the challenge is coming from all of these minor moves, small decisions, big systems as well. But all of that is held in the hands of people. We may not think that we are holding ourselves major levers for addressing the climate crisis, but really, other than some fossil fuel executives and some leaders of countries, very few of us are. So we've got to embrace the power that these smaller levers can play, that local, community, professional, civic action can play, because the only way that we counter the huge forces that you're talking about, right? The forces that keep us stuck in the fossil fuel economy, the forces that keep policy from catching up with the realities of the physics of our planet. The only way we do that is to have a huge upwelling of many, many more of us saying, no, I'm not too small. And I'm not too late, and there is a role that I can play, and it's going to be in the context of my own life. Not just what happens at home, but what happens in our professional lives, what we do with our work days, and how we participate in this extraordinarily precious and fragile democracy.
Right. Well, you have adopted, like you just said, a framework that can accompany the spheres in which we can make a difference, first in our personal lives and our professional lives, but also in the public life. And since we are a democracy podcast, let's talk about the public life. How does the practice of democracy fit into climate wayfinding?
So the really important thing to know is that around the world, majorities of people want to see more action to address this issue. Majorities of people are worried. Upwards of 89% of people say they want to see more action from government. But here's the catch, Mila. most of us think that we are not the majority. Most of us think that the climate majority is actually a minority. And what that tells you is that if we really realized how big of a collective we're a part of and democracy was working, we would be moving all of the solutions forward because that is what the people want. And there's a reason why authoritarian regimes have really cozy relationships with the fossil fuel industry. Sometimes they're one and the same. There's a reason why the fossil fuel industry spends so much money on political campaigns and having politicians kind of bought out and in their pocket, because if the people were speaking truly on the even playing field of a real democracy, we wouldn't still be expanding gas infrastructure. We wouldn't still be drilling on our public lands. We would be charging forward to the incredible solutions that we have around clean energy, around clean transportation, for our buildings, for regenerative agriculture, for protecting and restoring ecosystems. All of those are not just good for the climate, they are good for every aspect of our lives. They create jobs, they improve health, they give us beautiful, wonderful places to live and work and play. And so you start to realize this is fundamentally an issue of democracy. This is fundamentally an issue of participation. And I just believe so wholeheartedly that we are each a node of possibility for the transformation that needs to happen, for the healing that needs to happen. But we've got to see ourselves that way. That's the first step.
That's the first step. That's a good reminder. You know, your book is really beautiful. It's both a toolbox in my mind, but also a meditation on what it means to be human in this time, during this crisis on the planet. And, one of the things I note is that there is no exit. We cannot really exoplanet. That's just a fantasy. So we really need to do it here, and we need to do it now. And in each chapter, you include a profile and a story of an activist. And the story of Dr. Wangari Maathai really stood out to me. In 2004, she was the first African woman to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for the Green Belt movement. And you quote her daughter when she said that the prize was awarded for having made the connection between the environment, community, and peace. Tell us more about the Green Belt movement and how it made that connection. Because I think we all feel like, you say we have to all think collectively how we do this together. And I feel like she did this so well and she won a Nobel Prize. I think people don't think about it this way.
Yes, and she was the first African woman to win the prize. She was the first environmental leader to win the prize. It was groundbreaking in so many ways. And the Greenbelt movement really grew out of the observations of women on the ground in Kenya, coming to Dr. Maathai and saying, as deforestation rolls across this country, our livelihoods are going with it. The wood that we need for fire, the forests that provide food and respite, these things are going away. And rather than saying, okay, well, this is something that someone else should fix, she envisioned this movement of women across Kenya becoming planters and keepers of trees. And that is really what the Greenbelt movement was about. But in the process, it created livelihoods, it created incomes, it created civic participation. And so this was the real power of her receipt of that award, was that she was connecting the dots between environmental destruction, community, environmental protection, democracy, and peace. And that was really radical at the time, so much so that there were a lot of naysayers of like, why should you get the Peace Prize for environmental work? And happily, I think a couple of decades later, we see these connections much more clearly. But she was so important for helping make that case, not just in Kenya, but really to the world. And her daughter, Wanjira, has carried on kind of that legacy. And it's in the chapter in the book about community. And we think sometimes about community as being just our current peers, right? The folks that we are alive with right now. But I love that the story is really about this intergenerational work, that our community is our ancestors and our community is those generations who have yet to be born. And we're working in this connected linking way that I just think is so beautiful and left me thinking about monarch butterflies and the way that you have generations of butterflies that do the migration from Mexico to milkweed in the US and back. And the journey is so long that it exceeds a single monarch's lifespan. It is somehow passed to daughters and granddaughters and great-granddaughters who complete that journey. And I think that's such a powerful metaphor for us to think about this work of our lifetimes and beyond.
Well, it is very powerful to think about it in this way. And when I personally think about the climate crisis, I honestly feel despair. I feel like we cannot escape this infrastructure of fossil fuel consumption, endless plastic, being dependent on cars, et cetera, et cetera. But your book is really a sobering reminder that we do, in fact, have agency. And you quote Dr. Kate Marvell, and she says, the biggest variable in determining our climate future is human behavior. So I have a two-part question for you. What is the behavior that we need to stop? And what is the behavior that we need to embrace? And I know we have to start with thinking about ourselves as being the nodes of possibility that we can do this, that we are thinking that we are part of this large majority that wants to have change. And I also want to acknowledge that thinking is a form of action. But let's go with something a little bit more concrete from our brains to something that we're actually, quote, doing. So what is it that we need to stop doing first?
Gosh, there are so many different ways to answer this, Mila. But I think to pick up on what you were just expressing about the emotions that you have about this, that is so reasonable. I think we do feel overwhelmed. We feel grief. We feel fear. We feel anger. In the case of young people, a lot of young people express a sense of betrayal, right? Of being betrayed by leaders who knew and didn't act or didn't do enough. And all of these emotions, they are not, as my friend Sherry Mitchell says, something wrong with us. They are a sign of something being righted within us. But if we don't have space to name them, if we don't have space to hold them with some compassion and not just alone in our bed at night, worried about what this summer of climate impacts is going to bring, they can keep us stuck. They can become a source of paralysis rather than a source of motivation and fuel. So I think one of the things we have to do is stop trying to sort of tuck those feelings away as something we don't want to feel and actually let them come in because they are an expression of life trying to move forward to more life. They are teachers, they're guides, they are profound motivation for us. And I think if we're not getting into the truth of what we feel about this time, if we just numb it, if we just shove it away, we won't take those steps. So again, this is sort of one of those, in the same way that thinking is a form of action, creating space to follow the emotions that we have and to share them, that is often the beginning of action as well.
Right. So what's like the next behavior that we should be embracing after we are acknowledging our feelings and coming to terms with the fact that, yes, this is really depressing. I have young adults as children, and I agree they feel betrayed. Yeah. And that they think we're not going to survive life on this planet. Like, I think they're very pessimistic.
Yeah. We know that for significant percentages of young people, they're thinking, I'm not going to have kids because it doesn't feel like the responsible thing to do to bring someone into this mess. So yes, it's very big and it's very heavy. And I think we have to have sort of the depth of that feeling. But this piece about looking inward with care is not just about the distressing things that we feel, not just about the heaviness that we feel, but it's also about identifying our unique gifts, those superpowers you mentioned, Mila, the things that give us a sense of inner power and deep joy, and the ways that we express life force. I mean, you do this as a communicator. We do this each in such different and beautifully unique ways. But so many people think, well, my skills, my talents, they're not really relevant to climate change. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. So I think there's also a really important step of honoring those gifts, those superpowers, and then beginning to connect the dots. Okay, I'm a teacher. I may not be a climate science teacher, but there's a way that I could bring this into the classroom. Okay, I'm a lawyer. We need the power of the law. How could I help? Maybe it's some pro bono work. Okay, I'm in advertising. How do we craft more compelling messages so this gets through to the public? Okay, I'm a political strategist. I've never worked on climate before. But hey, there's some really important local zoning legislation that's happening. I'm going to leverage that to help on that piece. And I think it's a million of these finding of footholds that we want a punch list. We want someone to come along and say, well, Mila, it's all very simple. You do 1, 2, 3, and then you really don't have to worry about this anymore. But that's just not how it works. And it's not how we give of the very best of ourselves. So I think being willing to get into that process of discernment is really important. And it is really what this book is designed to do. And then, of course, there's a piece about looking outward with curiosity. The truth is that even as the problem continues to grow, the solutions are also growing. We have now clean energy. Solar power and wind power are the cheapest form of electricity generation on the planet. That has happened so much faster than we thought it would. You've got folks in Pakistan going to their local market, getting a solar panel, watching a TikTok video, and putting it on their house. Like, there is momentum that is happening. And so when we look out at that landscape of solutions, what's there that feels exciting, that sparks some energy and wonder that we want to be in creative relationship with? We can't do it all. One of the books I worked on about a decade ago is called Drawdown, and it's a compendium of 100 climate solutions. Well, there's no way we can all work on all of those, but there's something in there that might really kind of stir some fire in the belly. And that's where we can engage.
Well, it's good that you mentioned that there are many practices and technologies that can help us stop emitting greenhouse gases more or less immediately. And of course, we're constantly being led to believe that the solutions lie far off in the future.
Yes.
And that's not true.
Which is a key message of the fossil fuel industry, right?
Yes.
That the solutions either don't exist or they do exist and they're bad.
They're bad, they're expensive, you can't afford them, they're too expensive or whatever, except that you just said that solar and wind are both the cheapest way to get electricity. But so among the many solutions out there, what is the technology that you think of personally right now that could be really transformative and tip the scales? Something big, not something that all of us do, but something you're like, this is the future. Or this is the right now. We need to just embrace it.
Well, it's helpful to remember that about 2/3 of the problem comes from burning fossil fuels. And that's burning fossil fuels in transportation. It's burning fossil fuels to produce electricity. It's the use of fossil fuels in gas stoves and water heaters and HVAC systems. And the truth of that is that there are machines everywhere, upwards of 1 billion of them in the US alone. These machines in our lives that are burning fossil fuels. And so the biggest thing is that we have to replace the fossil fuel burning machines, whether they're at the scale of a power plant or at the scale of a car or at the scale of a stove. We have to replace them with clean electricity combined with machines that don't need fossil fuels but can run off of power that's produced by solar, wind, geothermal. So it's not a single thing, right?
Yes.
But certainly within that system, there's a reason why Bill McKibben wrote a book last year called Here Comes the Sun. Solar power has so much potential because it can be generated almost anywhere. You can hang a solar panel off the edge of a balcony on an apartment building and make solar power. But in the US, we've put up a lot of barriers to that. We have a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of hoops you have to jump through to get permitted, which means it makes it slower and more expensive to build solar here. There is so much solar electricity being generated in Australia now that they are giving it away for free at the middle of the day.
Wow.
That is possible. And that goes back, Mila, to the conversation we were having about democracy and authoritarianism. There is nothing more democratic than sunshine, right? And
Yes.
if we have the capacity to produce electricity that is held by communities, that is on our roofs or in our backyards or on farmland, there's amazing things being done with what we call agrovoltaics. And this is quite funny, Mila. The only thing you really can't do combining agriculture and solar is have goats, because they will jump on the panels and break them. But this is actually a way that farmers can start to have another source of income on their land and actually help crops and animals cope with increasing heat, increasing drought. There's so much that becomes possible. And that is all, to me, so exciting, because it is not off in the future. We're not talking about cracking fusion. We are talking about something that is happening everywhere. And that is something that can be in our hands. And this, of course, is why our current administration has done so much to dismantle the investments, to insist on taking down existing wind farms. Because if you had real competition, if fossil fuels were not subsidized the way that they are, if we were not actively trying to block clean energy from coming to the fore, we would be in a very different place.
Yeah.
And they're trying to forestall the future.
We'll be back with Katharine in just a moment, so stick around. You'll definitely want to tune in to this episode's Civic Spark. One small step we can all take to be more empowered and ignite collective change. But first, are you numb to it yet? This wild ride of life we've lived lately, I mean. All this doom and gloom around AI, the constant geopolitical changes shaking up the globe, and the market is bouncing around like a yo-yo. It's no wonder most of us are hunkering down, saving, and looking for ways to protect our futures. One way you may have forgotten about is through the right life insurance policy. I know that you've heard of life insurance, but did you know that it's cheaper than you think? The younger you are, the cheaper it is. Like double the price if you wait to buy a decade from now. That's why so many are looking for a life insurance policy today with SelectQuote. I'd like to thank SelectQuote for supporting Future Hindsight. If you're new to life insurance, you're not alone. Thankfully, I found SelectQuote. For over 40 years, SelectQuote has helped more than 2 million Americans understand their options and get the coverage they need. Over $700 billion in coverage and counting. As a broker, their mission is simple: to find you the right insurance policy at the best price. SelectQuote takes the guesswork out of finding the right life insurance policy. You don't have to sort through dozens of confusing options on your own. Instead, one of their licensed agents will find the right policy at the right price for you, comparing plans from trusted, top-rated insurance companies to find a policy that fits your health, your lifestyle, and your budget. And they work for you for free. You'll be covered faster than you think. SelectQuote works with providers who offer same-day coverage, up to $2 million worth, with no medical exam required. And you're not out of luck if you have pre-existing health conditions, because SelectQuote partners with companies that offer policies for people with conditions like high blood pressure, diabetes, or heart disease. SelectQuote makes life insurance simple, even if this is your first time thinking about it. Head to selectquote.com/hopeful, and a licensed insurance agent will call you right away with the right policy for your life and your budget. Life insurance is never cheaper than it is today. SelectQuote, they shop, you save. Get the right life insurance for you for less and save more than 50% at selectquote.com/hopeful. Save more than 50% on term life insurance at selectquote.com/hopeful today to get started. That's selectquote.com/hopeful. And now, let's return to my conversation with Katharine Wilkinson. Well, I think this conversation would not be complete without asking a question about what's happening in the Middle East with the war and the Emirates leaving OPEC. How do you think about that as maybe being a catalyst for more alternative sources of energy and places like China, accelerating their way forward in terms of clean energy. Tell me, what do you think?
Well, I think it is certainly was not the intention of the warmongers, but I think it has made a very strong case for all of the issues in this current system, climate aside, right? That the fossil fuel economy is based on violence. It is based on control. It is based on a system that is concentrating more and more money into fewer and fewer hands. And so I think it's probably making a case for clean energy to people who might not even be willing to accept the science of climate change. It's a very small minority at this point, but they're still out there. You don't want to be entangled with this system where all of a sudden you've got gas that's $1 more a gallon and you can't afford to commute to your job. This is a risky system that we're a part of in so many different ways. So I'm hopeful that the unexpected argument that all of this is making to people is this isn't working and this is not what we want.
Right. Well, you talk about accelerators for change, this, of course, being one that we did not anticipate. But in any case, in the book, you have a whole chapter, a whole section on this about accelerators for change, which sounds like it was designed to be in a Future Hindsight episode, honestly.
So maybe we have to have a whole conversation just about that.
Yeah, we should, because there's a lot to be discussed there. But how do you think about these accelerators as necessary leverage points for solutions to gain scale?
Yes. So the distinction that I make in the book is solutions I think of as like the actual tools, the solar panels,
right?
The regenerative agriculture practices, the things that actually do the work of avoiding greenhouse gas pollution. But there's a whole bunch of conditions that are needed to move those solutions forward. So we need to be shifting policy so that the regulatory environment for these things is easier and is more generative. We need to build power. This is the piece about democracy and participation. I think about, for example, in Georgia, where I lived last year, we flipped 2 seats on the Public Service Commission, which sounds like a very wonky thing. What even is the PSC? But that's the regulatory body for utilities in our state. And most states have an elected utility or public service body that isn't all that many people, right? That is actually a place where we really can shift change if we build the power and participation to do it. This is also where I think the world you live in, Mila, and the world I live in a lot of times is how do we shift culture? How do we shift narratives? How do we tell different stories about who we are and what's right and what our responsibilities are to one another and to this amazing planet that we call home? These are all examples of those accelerators for change. Anyone who knows the work of Donella Meadows, you'll be hearing echoes of leverage points in a complex system. That we don't just get the magical technologies moving forward without changing culture, without building power, without shifting policy, without moving capital. All of these things are necessary. And sometimes for folks who think, well, there's not one solution in the set of solutions that I really want to work on. I'm not going to be a wind turbine installer, right? I'm not going to be a regenerative farmer. But maybe I'm someone who wants to pick one of these accelerators to really lean into and help create the conditions for solutions to move forward.
Yes, well said. I'm definitely a believer that we need to invest, especially in narrative change and changing our culture. And your book is so clear on centering humans, centering people in this action. And we change our society brick by brick. I was talking to somebody, this sounds kind of like a real non sequitur, but I was talking to somebody about the Netflix documentary on Martha Stewart and how our perception today about who she is and how we perceived her in the 90s is totally different. And that didn't happen overnight, right? But all this to say, like, we are living proof that we are constantly changing our minds and constantly changing our culture. And we can also change this.
We absolutely can, and we absolutely must. And you know who is investing a lot in storytelling and narrative?
Fossil fuels.
The fossil fuel industry, right?
Yes.
There is a reason why they have had a mega PR machine that's been weaving these myths, right? First, the science is wrong. Then there's nothing we can do. Now, well, the solutions aren't real. They're not good. They're going to hurt you. They keep evolving the story to try to keep us stuck where we are. And if we are not meeting that with our own sense of clarity and strategy and gusto about narratives, we're just giving them the playing field. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yes, it's true. I'm curious about how you came to write this book. You have written multiple books on climate. You mentioned you wrote Drawdown, which is a comprehensive look at the world's abundance of climate solutions. And you wrote that 10 years ago, so Climate Wayfinding is very different than Drawdown. So how did you come to write this kind of book in this moment?
One of the real kind of ahas for me in the process of doing the Drawdown work was that, by and large, the existence of solutions is not the limiting factor. We have an abundant toolbox of solutions, but there's a leadership crisis at the heart of the climate crisis. There's a participation crisis at the heart of the climate crisis. And the next book that I worked on, All We Can Save, was one attempt to address that. It's a collection of writings by amazing women who are leading on climate in all different ways. That came out in 2020. But I noticed people might read that book and get really inspired about all the different ways you can participate, right? All the different ways you can lead. But they might still feel stuck on that question. But what can I do? How can I help? Is there anything I can do that will actually make a meaningful difference? And in my grappling with how to give better answers to that question, not the punch list that we were talking about, I was reflecting on what had worked in my own life as I have zigged and zagged through climate for now 27 years and counting. And I realized it wasn't about answers, like one and done forever answers. It was about practices for working with that question effectively and well again and again and again, because we keep coming to the crossroads, right? As the world changes, as we evolve, and as the possibilities and solutions shift. So I wrote a piece for Time magazine about 5 steps that had helped me answer the question, what can I do? And then in the context of the nonprofit I run, the All We Can Save project, we took those steps and translated them into an experiential learning journey. And we've been running that now for 4 years, including training educators at some 75 colleges and universities across the US and Canada to help students go through moving from overwhelm, isolation, burnout in some cases, to a sense of clarity and contribution and purpose and like, let's do this, right? And a program is a wonderful thing, but we're a tiny nonprofit. It can only reach so many people. And so I began to think about, well, what would it mean to take the ideas and the approach and the practices of this program and bring them to life in a book? And this is certainly a book you could just sit down and read, but it is not only a book that talks to you. There are essays, there's poetry, there are the lighting the way stories, but there's also a whole bunch of content to engage with, journaling prompts to do some free writing and exploration, creative mapping exercises around our sources of power and joy, guided meditations about our climate emotions, or casting our imaginative wisdom into a vision for the future. And really critically, there are elements in the book that help us do this together. There are guides for reading groups, we call them gather agendas, that are in every chapter so that we're not stuck trying to figure out all of this alone. We're building community, we're building the relational web, and we're doing some of that sense-making and planning with each other. And community itself is such an important solution. It is something that helps us cope and have resilience when climate impacts arrive, but it is also how we think about collective power. To quote again Bill McKibben, the most important thing we can do as an individual is to be less of an individual, to come together with others in projects and movements that are big enough to make a difference. And it's where the goodness is, right? This is a big, overwhelming, long-term challenge. But when we link arms with people that inspire us, that make us laugh, that give us a sense of courage, right? Our partners in good trouble, as my late Congressman John Lewis would say, that is what makes the work good right here, right now, and it keeps us moving forward.
Well, speaking of collective power, there are so many wonderful stories of success that start small in small communities and small group, which I think offers insight into how our own actions can add up. And I was really impressed by the International Court of Justice ruling in July of 2025, which, was in response to a campaign by some students. So tell us more about the ruling and how the campaign started, because I think this is something that really people need to understand. Where you are is a good place to start.
I love this story so much, Mila, and I really think that it is a fundamental argument against, just me, just here, nothing I can really do. So this was a classroom of law students in the South Pacific who were understandably really frustrated with the levers that are available at the national level for these small, low-lying island nations that are absolutely on the front lines of the worst climate impacts, literally taking away the future of these countries right now. And so they started to cook up ideas. What else could we do? What other kind of systems or strategies could we think about pursuing that might meaningfully make a difference for the future of the places where we live? And they had this idea of trying to get a climate case to the International Court of Justice, the World Court. And for them, it was exceedingly clear. If we have a World Court, it should be hearing about the world's biggest challenge. And so that was the campaign that they started to design, taking the world's biggest problem to the world's highest court. And they went to the foreign minister of Vanuatu and proposed this idea. Now, any strategist, any academic, any political mover and shaker would have told you it's impossible. It'll never get even through the United Nations General Assembly to have this case actually reach the ICJ. But this is the gumption, right? This is we don't care if it seems impossible. This is what is needed. And so they began to campaign. They put together a legal team that actually included one of my dearest friends from grad school, this amazing human rights lawyer, Jen Robinson, and get it to the court they did. And not only did they get it to the court, but there were testimonies by people from all of these countries all over the world, some bringing science, many bringing stories of the way that climate change is already taking away culture, taking away economies, harming these places, not sometime in the future, but right now, today. And the ICJ came back with a ruling that said countries are responsible. They are responsible for addressing the greenhouse gas pollution that causes this problem. And it went farther than anyone on that legal team dreamed that it would. And what that's going to mean is all still unfolding now, because there will be many, many lawsuits that are brought now at the national level against corporations, et cetera. But it is one of the biggest climate wins we have seen probably since the Paris Agreement. And that grew out of a classroom. And so for me, this is a reminder too that social movements are not just their big splashy moments, right? Mm-hmm. They're not just the marches from Selma to Montgomery. They're not just people occupying Zuccotti Park. They are small, quiet, often invisible spaces where change begins. These are the Quaker meeting houses that played such a pivotal role in abolitionism. They are the consciousness-raising circles that were happening in living rooms with feminists, right? They are the Highlander Folk School and the Black Church in the Civil Rights era. Rosa Parks, of course, trained in nonviolent resistance at the Highlander Folk School before the Montgomery bus boycott. So we have to think about this interplay between that quiet, small infrastructure of social change and the big moves that we look for. And we don't get the big moves without that kind of investment. And my great hope is that the Climate Wayfinding program, as it grows on campuses, as it reaches communities and workplaces and cultural institutions, it'll be one aid to strengthening that quiet human infrastructure of change that is all too easy to overlook, but it is so, so foundational.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, it's really inspiring. We just had an interview with someone who spoke about hopeful pessimism, and which is to say that, it may not get better. But for sure, if you take no action, it's much more likely to get worse.
Absolutely.
And so I feel like, these students, and even sometimes I feel this way about this podcast, that I don't know if it's really going to change a lot, but it'll change something for the better, right? I don't know how it'll all add up, but it's not going to be for naught, I think, to speak to people and help them to be better informed and have more power wherever they are in their lives.
I so agree. And I think about the story that's in the very first chapter in this book about Colette Pichon Battle, who's a climate justice leader in the Gulf South, was called into climate work in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, which wiped out her family home, stripped so many lives. And Colette comes from a place called Bayou Liberty, Louisiana, that will, unless there is some wild miracle beyond what anyone can imagine, it will go underwater. It will be lost. And this is land that has held her family for generations. It was the difference between being free or enslaved. And yet, even facing so much loss, Colette is still in the work. Because what else are we going to do? What else are we going to do? We cannot sit on our hands and let this all go. It is too precious. It's too precious. And for whatever reason, we are here in this time to be helpers, to be menders, and we don't know what the outcome of the work will be. But if we are looking for something to spend our waking hours, this precious time that we have in these bodies, the continuance of life, I mean, what more powerful mission could you possibly take on?
Right. Well, this is perfect for my next question, because every week on Future Hindsight, I ask my guests to share a civic spark, one small step we can all take to be more empowered and ignite collective change. We already discussed some of the public aspect-facing actions we can be taking toward a future vision of a more balanced world, but what's a good way to turn the insights that you've shared with us into action in our personal lives?
One of the things I heard recently from my friend Abby Dillon, who leads Earth Justice, which is a really important legal organization bringing forward so many of the cases and lawsuits to try to protect our environment and our public health. She put it really simply. She said, we have to keep telling the truth. We have to keep telling the truth. And what we're witnessing right now, Mila, of course, is we've got megaphones in Washington just spewing misinformation. We have climate journalists losing their jobs at major media outlets everywhere. We have amazing climate leaders losing the roles that they've had in the federal government. And so there's this eerie silence that is growing in our culture about this topic that is not going anywhere, right? The physics of the atmosphere don't give a hoot about what is happening in Washington, D.C. And so this idea that we have to keep telling the truth, I think, is something for all of us to take on. And it could be telling the truth at our kitchen table. It could be telling the truth in our workplace. It could be telling the truth in a house of worship, if we belong to one. It could be telling the truth in the classroom. I think we all have to take ownership of that in our unique ways. You don't have to be a climate expert. You don't have to have a PhD. You don't need any PowerPoints with charts and graphs. You just need to be a human who is awake and noticing what's happening and cares and wants things to be different. And I think if we can keep telling the truth, making noise, that is perhaps the most critical lever for change at this point. Because if we're not talking about it, if we're not saying it matters, that solutions exist, that we want them to roll out, we just won't get there. We won't get there. So that would be my call, to tell the truth wherever you are in the authentic voice and uniqueness that is you.
Thank you. Looking into the future, what makes you hopeful?
Part of what makes me hopeful, Mila, is actually looking backwards. So for 3.8 billion years, life has been moving forward to more life on this planet. This dynamic of life force is the fundamental truth of Earth. And of course, we are a part of it. We have been the lucky inheritors of that. And we have the opportunity to participate in the legacy of life's continuation and vibrancy and flourishing. And when I remember that, when I remember how big that dynamic is, that life force is, I stop feeling small in a bad way, and I start to feel small in a good way, in a connected way. And it makes me feel like, okay, we're participating in this much bigger thing. We are trying to help this young, powerful, sometimes very misguided species of ours to come back into balance with these bigger systems. And that, I think, is an extraordinary thing to take part in.
That's right. Thank you very much for joining me on Future Hindsight, Katharine. It was really a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Mila.
Dr. Katharine Wilkinson is the host of the podcast A Matter of Degrees and the author of Climate Wayfinding, Healing Ourselves and the Planet We Call Home. Remember, civic action doesn't have to be complicated. It's about small steps that spark progress, like sharing this episode with a friend. Let's recap this week's Civic Spark and fire up our collective power. Keep telling the truth. We're no strangers to the existence of misinformation and disinformation in our democracy, and the fossil fuel industry has been and continues to be one of the worst perpetrators over the past 5 decades. So, take action by speaking the truth. Next week on Future Hindsight, we're joined by Melissa Murray. She's a professor at NYU School of Law, co-host of the popular podcast Strict Scrutiny, and the author of The U.S. Constitution, a comprehensive and annotated guide for the modern reader.
I think a lot of people in our country talk about the Constitution, make constitutional claims reflexively, like you violated my First Amendment rights, but I don't think very many people have spent time reading the entire document.
That's next time on Future Hindsight. Now, be sure to follow us on your podcast app so you'll never miss an episode. Oh, and while you're there, please leave us a review. It really goes a long way for discovery. And if you're listening on your browser, you can find Future Hindsight on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcast app. We are here to build your civic action toolkit every week. So follow Future Hindsight now and we'll come right to you. And if you want to support Future Hindsight and all the work we do as an independent pro-democracy podcast, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. Head to youtube.com/Future Hindsight now. Thanks for tuning in. And until next time, see clearly, act boldly, and spark the change you want to see. This episode was produced by Zack, Travis, and me.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.